Good morning, everybody. My name is Lydia, and I'm one of the pastors here. And this morning, we're going to be talking about Side Week. It's Side Week, and after we've been going through some of the Soul Search things, saying Soul Search series 5 times fast is kind of difficult. But since we've been going through that, we're returning to some of the basics. What does it look like to live a life that is characterized by up? What does it look like to live a life that is characterized by side weeks? And today we're diving into what that looks like, what community looks like. So, hi to Nipawa. Thank you for joining us. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. So, recently I got a different hairstyle. I chopped my hair off. It was actually quite long, and I kind of toyed with it for a while. Like, I'd get my hair chopped, and then I'd leave it for like a year and a half, 2, 3 years until it got long again, and then I'd chop it off. So I finally decided I was just going to chop it. And I'm not sure if you've ever done anything like that, but the day you get your hair cut is like a magical day because your hair looks perfect. And somebody has spent time working on your hair from a different angle than what you can see and what you can do with your hair. And so, like, you kind of don't want to waste the day, right? Like, you kind of want to make sure that it looks good. And you get all the compliments like, ooh, you got your hair cut. It looks so great. They never say that on the third day. Only say that on the first day. And I've noticed that, like, this was something I thought about and I did, and it looked great, but then I'm like, I don't want to go to sleep, because if I go to sleep, it's going to wreck my hair. And then, like, how far can you push it before you wash it? And then it's just disturbing and gross. Because if you wash it, then all the product that the person put into it is gone, and then your hair looks like this. So I'm still figuring it out, so don't judge me yet. But I kind of have two options, because the things that I was doing with my hair when I had a bad hair day don't work. The first one, I would just straighten it, and it would look fine. You can do that when you have long hair. And the other thing I do is just pull it all back. I don't have enough to do that with anymore, so I can't do that. So I've got two options. My first option is to exist in a baseball cap for the rest of my life until it gets long enough, and those aren't allowed at West Park. So that's tricky. And the other thing I could do is work on it. Every day, figure it out. Maybe this will work, maybe that will work, and work on it. Now, hair is silly, comparatively, but lots of us have just been through an experience where something has changed for us. We've had a spiritual experience with God, where what was before is now different. Things are different for us. We've prayed fear away. We've prayed some demonic stuff away. We have found that God can heal us in hurts and wounds that we never even thought were healable. But now we don't want to go back to that spot. We don't want to put the baseball cap on and wait for everything to grow out again. We want to move forward. And how do we do that? For us, I think sometimes we might think that that encounter that we had with God was so great we want to hold on to it forever. But actually, if you think about it, it was one encounter with God or over a series of 6 weeks. What if that wasn't the top? What if the best is still coming? What if actually, if we work on this and we live into this freedom that we now have as a person, as a child of God, we know who we are, and we have our soul cleansed by God. What if this is just the beginning? What if that experience you felt when we prayed for you, and for the first time things were clear, or you realized that you had given up something that you didn't need to hold on to, or that God had healed you from something horrific that you didn't think was possible to be healed from? What if that's just the beginning? I want to suggest that if God is willing to show up in an amazing way in a one-time encounter with you on a Sunday night here at church, and identify sin patterns, deliver you from all sorts of evil, then imagine what would happen if you consistently showed up. In James 4, verse 8, the author says, "Come close to God, and God will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world." What would happen if we actually came close to God? For me, one of the things that I've noticed is I've had this struggle for a few years, actually, in reading the Bible. And it's kind of a bad thing to say when you think about it, because, like, I do this for a living, so I should be able to read the Bible. And I do. But it's just been really weird. And I've given myself all sorts of excuses and reasons like, well, once you study it in Greek, it doesn't have the same devotional content that it might if you haven't. That's not true. That's totally not true. I've also thought, well, maybe I just don't connect with God through reading. Also not true, because I read a lot of everything else. But what would happen for me is when I would start to read my Bible, I would get distracted by all these weird things. Like, I'd start reading my Bible and I'd start worrying about whether or not mold was growing in my house. Like, just weird things. They don't make sense. I don't normally walk around worried about mold. But these were things that would come into my head. And after I was prayed for, and after the spirit of distraction was gone, and after I found freedom, I actually went to bed that night, and I was curious, so I flipped on my YouVersion on my phone, and I listened to the book of Acts, and I actually had to shut it off because I couldn't fall asleep. It was too exciting. It was like, this is us. We're doing this. This is what God is doing with us, too. And after that, I noticed that I woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning every morning, and I would wake up. And before that, if that had happened, before I was delivered, if that had happened, I would think, man, am I stressed at work. I really need to find some balance in my life. So I'd pull my phone out and play a game on my phone until I fell asleep. After my deliverance, what I did is I would say, is that you, God? Have you got something to say? And it was great times. And when he was silent, I'd pick up my phone and I'd listen to more. And so in the first few weeks after that deliverance prayer, I went through pretty much the entire New Testament, just listening, fascinated by it. And then it wasn't long before I stopped waking up at 2 and 3 in the morning. And at first I thought, well, it's getting into June, and I work at the school, so it's just crazy. So it's because God is letting me sleep, or he can't wake me up. Well, he could wake me up, and if he really wanted to still talk to me, he'd be able to give me the rest that I need, even if I was awake in the middle of the night talking to him. So I started thinking, well, that's probably not true. That's probably not something that's going on. And I was asking him, so why am I sleeping in? Why am I not waking up in the middle of the night? And I got this, it's your turn. You see, God was present and with me and pulling me through while I was weak. But now I've gotten stronger. Now I know the incredible gift it is to be able to read the Bible, to be able to spend time with my Father. So maybe I should take the initiative. Maybe I should do that. So that's what it was for me. The question is, what is it for you? Have you been recently healed or delivered from something pretty major? Our spiritual muscles are weak, either because we haven't developed them or because we have let them slide for a while. And so it's either that we never learned to use them or we haven't been using them in a while and they're weak. I've noticed this, and our family went through a little bit of this. When my daughter, Alethea, was born, she had hip dysplasia. Hip dysplasia is when your hip muscles aren't right. And both of her hips were wrong. What happens is your femur, the top of your leg bone, has a ball at the top, and then your hip joint comes around it like a cup, and then your hip moves like this. Well, with Alethea, hers was flat. So her hip bone was like this, so it could go everywhere. They diagnosed her with this when she was 1 month old, and she had to come back from the hospital that day looking like this. It's going to be cute. There she is in her little padlock harness. And so what that was is it's a little harness that keeps her hips immobilized. She could still kick her legs. She looks pretty happy there, kicking away at 1 month old. And she had to be in there for, I think, 6 weeks, 3 months, something like that. And diaper changing went from being, a couple of minutes as a new parent to being like half an hour. Try to figure out how to do that. But she survived that, and it fixed one of her hips. But the other hip was still wrong. It still wasn't right. And we'd have to go in for ultrasounds every once in a while on her hips because her bones weren't hard enough. You couldn't do x-rays on a baby that small because they don't show up. The bones don't show up on an x-ray, so they have to do ultrasounds. So then we had to do the next thing, and the next thing was called a spica-cast. And this is a picture of her. There's not a lot of great pictures of her with a spica-cast on that she would be okay with me showing you. So this is her in her spica-cast. It's the big pink thing that is her leg. So it was a cast from her waist down to her ankles, and she sat like this for 3 months. She had just started to kind of get up on her knees and her arms to start to crawl when she was put in it. And yeah, and she was in there. This is a picture of her in the hospital getting her second one on. They do one for 6 weeks, and then they do another one because the kids are growing. And actually, diaper changing in that one, if you're curious, was actually really easy because they can't move a thing. So you can just be there for all day. They can't do anything for you. We actually flew in an airplane with her like that, she and I. We went down to a conference, so that was pretty fun. And then, finally, the day came when she was going to have it removed. And boy, to see the joy on her face. There's a picture of her there. There we are in the hospital. And such little legs. And she's noticing what she's doing is she's rubbing her legs, because for the first time that she can remember, she can feel her hand on her leg, and she can feel her leg on her hand. Before, she couldn't feel both. And so she just kept on rubbing and rubbing and rubbing her legs. And she was so excited. And then we went out for a treat. And my 9-month-old baby is sitting in a high chair, and she can't sit up. You can see, like, she's actually pushed towards the other. She has no core strength. She's got no strength in her body. Her legs are very, very limp and wiggly, and she's got no strength to sit up. So my 9-month-old now can't sit, can't crawl, can't really go. And that's what happens when we atrophy. Now for Alethea, she dove right in. She was 9 months old, and she was gonna do this, and she didn't really don't think about it much. But in a couple of days, she was sitting up. She was crawling in a few weeks after that, and she was walking by 15 months. So it didn't really slow her down too much. And now she talks about how God has healed her from hip dysplasia. So that's an amazing story for her. But the atrophy was there. And the cast couldn't fix it. The only thing that can fix atrophy is to use the muscles that have been not used. So we can pray fear away. We can pray demons away. We can pray for healing. But we can't pray things like discipline, work, and training into our lives. The only way that we can be the kind of people who train those muscles that were weak is to train the muscles that were weak. It's to actually be disciplined is the only way that you can be disciplined. Have you ever tried to start a new exercise routine? I'm really not good at exercise. It's not my gift. I work here, and people on staff here, they ride up bikes up mountains for fun. That doesn't make sense to me. Neither does it make sense to ride bikes down mountains for fun. Either way, it doesn't make sense. I don't understand it. And then others go for runs for fun. Like, why? I don't understand. I'm pretty terrible in 3 dimensions. I'm pretty good with books. I'm good with that. But I've actually had 3 concussions in my life, and none of them sports related. So exercise is really not my thing. I have actually either fallen up or down every single flight of stairs in this building. I prefer up. It hurts less, even though it makes no sense. It hurts a little bit more if you're carrying a hot cup of coffee when you fall up the stairs, and you look like an idiot, but it's way less bruising because it's a lot quicker. So I like falling up the stairs better than down. And I've tried exercise routines, and they're all pretty pathetic. But once I actually did it for for me, a respectable amount of time. It was probably like a month or 2, but yeah, I figured I was like into it for a while. And my idea was to go running. Now, my problem was I couldn't go running with somebody because I'm not coordinated enough to actually run, talk, and go straight. So I would just run into the person I was running with, or I would fall off the sidewalk, or something like that. So it's better if I go by myself, in the dark, where no one can see me. What I noticed was, though, that the reason why I was I had this stick-with-itness for as long as I did for the exercise that I was doing is because I did a little bit of research and I knew what I was getting into. And then I invested in it. I bought fancy running shoes. And so I'm so cheap that I didn't want to be like, I have my fancy running shoes and I'm going to use them to go shopping. I had to use them to actually go running. So my cheapness helped me there. And the other thing I did is I found a friend of mine who was interested in running, and I talked to her about it. And so she told me the things I was doing that was wrong with my technique and how to fix it. She taught me a little bit about that. And then we would talk about what we had done. Lydia, did you go running this week? Lydia, did you go running last night? Did you go, how far did you run? Did you get 3 blocks in? Did you get 2 blocks in? How did you do it? Sometimes I told the truth. And then we would celebrate our milestones. But what I noticed is, when she stopped asking me, I stopped doing it. So what I learned from training, and I know this, is that you need to have a routine. You need to invest in it, you need correction and accountability, and you need to celebrate. This is no different if you're going to train your spiritual muscles, and if you're going to live out the freedom you've found. Listen to what's happening in the book of Acts. And here, at the beginning of Acts, something new has happened for these people, just kind of like it's happened for us. For them, the Holy Spirit has come for the very first time ever. For us, maybe he's come again. Maybe he's come in a new way. It's something new. And listen to what they've done in Acts 2. It starts at verse 42. All the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship and to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. A deep sense of awe came over all of them, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions. They shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple every day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity. And all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. Do you see that? They had a routine. They met every day in the temple. They invested in it. They sold their possessions and gave the money to those in need. They had correction and accountability. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. And they had celebrations. They shared meals. They had great joy. But here's why it was sustainable for Acts. Because they did all that stuff in community. Nobody did it by themselves. It was real community. So my question is, what if we did that? What if that's what our house churches looked like? What if we had Acts community house churches? I used to think that community is good, and I was right. But here's where I was wrong. I used to think that I was supposed to be in a house church, and if I was in a house church, I was doing it right. So I need community, I need a house church. It's something I can kind of check off a list of things you need to do to grow. House church, yes. But that's not the whole story. I figured I could just trust that I was growing, and the rest really wasn't my responsibility. See, community is good for shaping and growing us to look more like Jesus. That's why we have community. That's why we live in community. It's so that we can live and grow to be more like Jesus. If I'm part of a house church that's holding me accountable to follow the examples in the Bible of what communities do, they walk together, they call each other on things, they forgive one another and call each other to forgive those around them, they encourage one another to live like Jesus commands us to, then I'm on the right track and I'm growing. The point is to make you more like Jesus and to make the people in your house church more like Jesus. So if you're in a house church, and somebody always has the excuse, I didn't get to the readings this week, it's just been so busy. If the point of your house church, and if the response of your house church is to say, yeah, it's really, really hard, hey, when it's so busy, oh, it's so busy. Let's just be upset that it's so busy together. Then we're not being a house church. We're being a group of friends who got around and complain about how busy life is. Or if you're in a house church, what a house church person will say, yeah, it's hard to be busy. There's a lot of stuff. Yeah. When is your routine to read the Bible every day? Can I text you at that time? You got your Bible out? Maybe you need to get up like half an hour earlier every day just so that you can spend some time with God. And maybe you could go to bed a little bit earlier and not watch, 3 hours of Netflix. You could just watch 2.5. That's a house church, right? And that's a difference. If you're in a house church where certain conversations are off limits, like How do you spend your money? Where are your kids going to school? Where are your kids going to kids' church? Are your kids going to youth? Are you serving in the church on Sunday mornings? Are you coming to house church regularly? If those questions are awkward, then you're in a group of friends who meets regularly. You're not in a house church. House church has those kinds of questions. They're on limit. They're not off limits. They're invited. In Hebrews chapter 10, the writer there kind of sums this up. Says, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. Let's not neglect meeting together, but motivate each other to love and good works. Those are the two things about being in a house church. Here's the thing. If you look back in Genesis and you look at the beginning of the world, when God first created people, he creates one person. And then it says, God said, it's not good for this man to be alone. And so he creates a second person. Notice, this happens before sin comes into the world. Notice that you need community, not because you're weak and sinful. Notice, too, that when we talk about God, we talk about how he exists in three persons: the Father, the Holy Spirit, and the Son. God exists in community. So when we say you need community, it's not because you're weak and sinful, and we need to come together when we have issues, and we need to come together as a community to go through things. You need community because you were made in the image of a God who exists in community. You, in order to be like God, need community. So you need us, and we need you. But we don't just need each other. We need each other to make us more like Jesus. So this is the side week. This is where we focus on being in community and building that kind of community. And so here's a challenge. If you're not in a house church, find people who are in a house church and join theirs. Or find people who also aren't in a house church and start one. If you are in a house church, invite someone new. And then this week as you meet, take stock of it. Are we a house church, or are we a group of people who just hang out together sometimes? And we all kind of agree on this life, living our lives for Christ. Give permission, if you don't already have it, to your house church to hold you accountable to things. No questions off limits. Correct my thinking and behavior. Help me. Help me build my weaker spiritual muscles. Talk about what they are. You probably know what they are. And if you don't, ask God, and he'll tell you. If you haven't given that community, that permission to each other, give it, and you'll actually be part of a house church. We're going to sing a song, and then I'll come back up and close.